Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. The conventional wisdom says New Yorkers are abandoning the city in droves, setting up households in the suburbs, upstate, in the Hamptons, anywhere but here. Is that true? And if it's true, is it permanent? And if it's permanent, what are the implications? I'll ask my guest, Jason Haber, a writer and lecturer whose special focus has been real estate and urban planning. Jason, welcome. Thanks for doing the show. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you again. Hopefully next time in person, though.
I know, exactly. This is the whole thing. This whole COVID-19 thing has been so strange, and this is one very strange aspect of it. Is New York emptying out? I mean, are people really leaving in droves? What's going on?
So COVID was, among many things, and is an accelerant. And by that, I mean people who were thinking of leaving 1, 2, 3 years from now, they accelerated their plans and moved out. And we know this from data that there were a couple 100,000 people who did leave the city. We know from the real estate community in the suburbs that there was a huge run up in both prices and interest from buyers. And so we know that that was real. So on the one hand, yes, people did move out. And I think that that's pretty much an established fact at this point.
So, who is it who's leaving? Are these primarily families, for example, who can work from a distance and whose kids are on Zoom or some other form of device who are going to school, and people who are afraid of mass transit? Are they mostly families and people of that age?
Yes. Well, first, the work from home play is a factor here, where people were thinking, I can work from home, I can live anywhere I want. I can live in the suburbs, I can live down south. And so that's part of it. But another part of it just happens to be life planning. There are people who, when they need more space because they have more kids, they leave the city. We know this happens regularly in normal times. Those people, that cohort, accelerated their plans and they moved out 1 or 2 years earlier than they otherwise would have. But people choose. No one has to come live in any city, whether it's New York or Los Angeles, wherever it is. People will choose cities, has always been my argument, if you make the underpinnings of that city worthy of their choice. And I know we're going to get into this later in our conversation. That's one of the things that New York has to start to think about how we factor into people's choices going forward, because we know that as far as cities go, population is destiny. There is nothing that could erode a city more than a declining population base. You know, it's interesting, Bob, I was just thinking about this. In the 400 years of New York City history, did you know we only have one 40-year period where the population declined from pick any point? There's only one. It's 1940 to 1980. If you pick any other 40-year period in 400 years of history, okay, the population has gone up. Now, those 40 years are the Robert Moses years, which were destructive for New York City. And so we know that when you have declining population, that's the canary in the coal mine for a city. And so that's why you get alarmed when you see that there's been an exodus of people in a short period of time, because we know how important population is.
So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in New York, and real estate is the perfect way, I think, to look at it. So let's start with residential real estate, and let's talk about, we'll get to rentals, but right now let's talk about things like condos, co-ops, and brownstones. What's going on? What's the market like?
So before COVID, the market was in a sort of a gentle decline. It's accelerated in 2019, started to show improvement at the end of last year. And then, of course, when COVID hit, the market came down further. By most estimates, there's a 10 to 20%, probably 15% overall drop in the market. However, that drop is going to be short-lived. We're already seeing signs of a comeback, maybe not to par yet, but we're probably more in the order of 5 to 10% down right now. We'll probably move back to par at some point. The vaccine, whenever that starts to happen, where we get into the vaccine period of COVID, will probably be when we get back to pre-COVID pricing, which again was already down from the peak of the market.
Who are these people who are coming back? Are these people who, for example, had second homes? I know a lot of people who moved out to the Hamptons. Are these people who just went away temporarily while the pandemic is here, who did rentals or whatever? The reason I'm asking the question that way is I assume families who go by in the suburbs in Jersey or Westchester or Long Island, I assume they're gone for good. So who is it who's coming back?
So this ties into the rental market too. The two are kind of linked in a way. There is a huge swell of people who were renting, who instead of leaving the city opted to buy in the city now. And what were they driven by?
Oh, that's interesting.
Two important factors. The first factor is we had this big sudden drop in price. So they took advantage of the situation there and got a good deal. Secondly, we have historically low interest rates. So it made it affordable, more affordable to buy those homes. And the reason we know that's also true is, unlike the sale market, which I told you has sort of come down and we're seeing a return, the rental market has completely crashed and we're not yet seeing a return. It's because it's like the old 8th grade laws of supply and demand. The demand has plummeted. They've either gone to the suburbs or they've purchased. And so now you have very, very high, well, for New York anyway, vacancy rates, which are bringing down the rental prices. And at the same time, we're seeing prices on, come back in the sale market. So it's an interesting dynamic that's happening right now. And the buyers themselves, are they mostly in New York? Yes, but I have to tell you, there are also buyers who are coming from the suburbs to buy in New York as well, whether it's a second home, or maybe they've always wanted to live here and they couldn't afford it. There are people filling the orders, which is the big difference between now and 2009. 2009 was a financial crisis where people didn't know, when prices came down, people didn't know if the market was going to get worse and worse and worse. They didn't have confidence in it. Interest rates were higher and prices kept going down. Even if you lowered prices in 2009, people still weren't going to take the bait and buy. Now it's a different story. So it's a very different market than 2009 for those two reasons. And it's a market that there's more confidence in long term, that New York is a good place to be. It'll be a different place though, but a good place.
Can you talk a little bit about the potential consequences of this collapse in the rental market?
Well, it opens up opportunities too. One of the problems with living in New York City has been the livability, the affordability of it. So if rental prices come down, it will allow new people to enter the market who may say, oh, maybe I can make it in New York City. Maybe I can move to New York now and take advantage of that. So you're going to start to see that too. Now, from the ownership side, it's very difficult because, of course, you've got, your mortgages don't go down, your insurance doesn't go down, your fuel, your heating doesn't go down. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on sort of the multifamily market, particularly if rents are going down and expenses are going up. It's a very bad recipe. So they're in trouble.
Right. So we've been talking about residential real estate. Let's talk now about commercial real estate. A big deal has, of course, and you mentioned it, has been this idea of folks working from home. So these are most especially office workers, so they can get on Zoom and continue to do their jobs. So when people think of commercial real estate, they think of these enormous office towers. Obviously, that's not all there is to commercial real estate, but that's what people tend to think of: the skyscrapers and these huge towers. And back in the spring, they were largely empty or mostly empty. I mean, it was eerie to walk around town. Now, another aspect that people have been talking about is this idea that working remotely, to some extent at least, is going to take on a certain permanence. So what's going to happen? First, what is happening with these office towers? Are they still mostly empty? And what's going to continue to happen? Will a lot of them end up being white elephants?
Yes, so they are. There's a lot of them that are still empty. When you go into Midtown, of course, today you can still see it. Just walk up and down on the 6th Avenue Midtown corridor, and you can obviously still feel the difference. So they're going to change. They're going to change in two ways. The first way they're going to change is that the tenancies will probably change. And while we are seeing companies leave and work from home, don't forget we're also seeing tech companies looking to come in and pick up new leases. So I think the kinds of companies that are coming to New York will shift a little bit. But secondly, how the offices are designed is going to change as well. We have right now, we're in the era of the office bullpen, right? Where everyone's sort of packed in, so this community idea. We'll probably see more private office, more separation of space, even after a vaccine, because I think there are some fundamental ways that COVID changes us. And so I think you'll see the floor plates change. But I think over time, you're going to see as you're going to see people want to come back to work, and I'll tell you why it's going to be. When you're going out for, say, a sales pitch, right? And so I'm going for a sales pitch, I'm trying to pitch you, and I do it over Zoom. And you meet with someone else, and they meet you in person, and they get that pitch. All my next pitches are going to be in person. That's how, and by the way, that's exactly why the airline industry is going to come back for business travel too. It's just
I keep hearing that the airline industry is going to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will. I just think they need a bailout, and to get through. And I believe it'll take a long time, but I think they will. The business traveler will return for that example that I just gave you. And so I think you're going to see eventually this rotation back to, maybe it's a hybrid model, it's a different work model. People may be working more from home, but I think eventually you'll see a return to more regular office work too.
Now, the commercial real estate is not just these enormous towers. We have all kinds of, I mean, I don't know how many restaurants in New York. It's something that all New Yorkers are familiar with. And it's a tough business in the best of times. So a lot of restaurants have closed. I anticipate more will close, but there's also all these other businesses in New York. You have cleaners, you have beauty salons, you have nail salons, and on and on and on. What's happening with that market, the commercial real estate market that doesn't consist of these enormous office towers?
Well, a lot of them, there have been renegotiations on rent, a lot of rent deferrals. What we're seeing in restaurants is a cooperative agreement between landlord and tenant. And by that, I mean, instead of just collecting X amount a month, there's a lower amount that is taken by the landlord, and then the rest is a percent of sales. This way, the landlord has a bit of an incentivization for the tenant to do well, and it's more of a cooperative environment. And there are a lot of examples of that happening right now in the city. So I think you're going to have to see people get creative to get through this, both on the landlord and tenant side. And we're starting to see that. And by the way, it doesn't work for everyone. That's why we see so many, closed stores, which is, terrible, and something that we're going to need to address in the city. Can't have functioning streetscapes with boarded up stores. It just doesn't work.
Now, one of the things that I had expected was that we were going to see a lot of foreclosures and evictions. Now, I know that moratoriums have held off some of that, but are we seeing it yet? And do you expect that to accelerate?
Yes. So we're not seeing it yet. That's a 2021 issue and a major one. And we will see those starting in the year.
Now, the things that you've been talking about, even where ultimately, or where you're optimistic long-term, they still have an enormous impact on the economy of New York.
Yeah.
If you talk about the downturn in real estate, residential, and commercial, if you talk about foreclosures and evictions, if you talk about small businesses, not being able to make it. Do you have a sense of how big a hit the city is going to take? I mean, we've been through big problems before, the fiscal crisis,
Yeah.
the 2008, 2009 downturn. There was a problem after September 11th. What are you anticipating this time?
Yeah, it's actually worse than that now. New York City's Comptroller Scott Stringer has estimated it to be up to $9 billion. It's a very serious budget gap right now. We've lost so much in terms of, regularly occurring revenue in the forms of sales taxes, real property transfer taxes. The city just didn't collect in fiscal year 2020, and it's a problem. And so that's also something that's going to need to be addressed by the city. Combination of, federal bailout money, revenue raises where you can. And it's a very fine balancing act because it's a difficult time to raise taxes on people too. So the city has their hands full in figuring out budgetarily what they're going to do to solve that. It's a very big challenge.
Another thing that I've been worried about, and it's interesting, in mass transit, I would say the subways and buses are cleaner than I've ever seen them. And
Yep.
I've been living in New York City for more than 40 years now. So they're amazingly clean. But a lot of people are still worried because of COVID, worried about taking mass transit. And of course, with the revenues down, with the population declining, mass transit's going to be in trouble economically. And then, of course, that holds back an economic recovery.
Yeah.
When mass transit is struggling, it makes everything that much more difficult. What do you anticipate on that front? And what are the implications of the problems that we're having with mass transit?
So outside of the obvious need for a bailout, I think it's important to consider that once we have the vaccine and the COVID cases decline, and figure maybe this time next year we're through, maybe hopefully sooner, of course, we're through the acute phase of COVID at least, and we've gotten a vaccinated population where you can take the subways and be in a crowded car and at least feel comfortable. I think the idea of how we get around in the city has to entirely change. One of the reasons why mass transit is empty right now is because people are driving into the city more right now. And that's evidenced by how hard it is to find parking, and the streets are congested. And
this is before a complete comeback in the city.
Yeah. So we're going to have a major automobile problem in this city, and we have to plan ahead and accordingly for it. I've been calling for the end of what I call the autocracy of our streetscape.
Autocracy, AUTO. Yeah.
Autocracy of our streetscape, and reimagining how people move in and pass through the city, and providing options that are viable, that are safe, whether they're bike lanes, expansions of the e-scooter programs, and mass transit is a huge piece of the puzzle. It's the biggest piece of the puzzle. But the traffic that we have that comes in, which creates carbon dioxide, terrible for the environment, that is driven by people who don't feel safe on mass transit. Once we're through it, I understand I understand why that is now. Now is probably not the moment. This exact second is not the moment to push people to mass transit, but that day will come, and we need to plan now for that day. So when we can tell people, listen, you're completely safe in a crowded subway car, that we get people there. The city has no future with clogged arteries and clogged streets with cars. It just doesn't work. And that's where we're headed right now. Because if you think the traffic is rough today, I mean, just wait when people, like you said, when work from home rotates and more people are coming in. We're staring down a very serious problem with our streetscape, which requires innovation to solve.
One more question about real estate. There was a reason why New Yorkers, long before the pandemic, talked about real estate all the time. I mean, you'd go out to dinner and people would be talking, it would be dinner conversation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because real estate is such a vital aspect of life and the economy in New
Right.
York. But explain if you can, why real estate is so important. Why do people talk about it more here than in some other large cities?
Well, I think my opinion is and Ray Suarez, who I think is great, he's talked about this, and he said things like, most cities have a thing. Pittsburgh is steel, Los Angeles is movies, Detroit cars, but New York never had one thing. And so to expand on his principle, I think our one thing became our most unique, the most immovable, indestructible thing we have, which is our real estate. And real estate became a sport. It's Saturday night dinner conversation. Why would you want to talk about the losing ways of our sports teams? Terrible. When you can
Talking
talk
to
about
a Jet fan, be careful.
crazy prices. I mean, how many wins the Jets and Giants have combined? One.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
And that's probably still better than the Knicks record will be next year. So it's like, there's always something about New York City real estate that's compelling and intoxicating, and people love to chat about it. You have the billionaires row prices are so high, and there's so many interesting elements to it that it's taken on a life of its own in the city in ways that I don't think happens in other cities.
You were talking about street life in New York and the autocracy.
Yeah.
So expand on that. You have pretty strong views on what you would like the streets of New York City to look like, what
Yeah.
the neighborhoods would look like outdoors, and what the implications would be for traffic and traffic patterns around the city. Talk a little bit about where you'd like to see the city move.
Sure. Well, I think the city right now, first of all, is at an intermission. Jane Jacobs would talk about the city being a ballet, and all the streetscape has all these intricate actors and participants in the streetscape ballet. And like any ballet, there's intermissions. And right now I describe our moment in time in New York City as one of intermission. So the question now before us going forward is, what do we do when the next act comes? How do we make that next act strong and vital and successful? People get restless during intermissions, and some people leave, and that's what happened now. Here's what I see in the next act. I see pushing people to mass transit, the reduction of cars on the city streets. One thing we can do, for example, is we have 4 million free parking spots on the streets of New York City. If you just charge the people who commute in $3 a day, it's about 60% of all spots are from people outside the city. That would raise half of the budget gap that we have right now. It would raise $4 billion a year from people outside the city. I think if you charge people, if it costs them money, then you're going to push them to alternative transportations. I think we have to expand bike lanes greatly. I would actually raise the elevations of the bike lanes so they're no longer on the same level as the street. I would reduce the amount of lanes that we have for cars. For example, I still don't understand why, say, Central Park West, for example, is a two-way street. I think it should be a one-way street with one lane dedicated for a bus, one lane dedicated for a car, and 2 bike lanes going north and south. And you could replicate that all over the city. What we learned in the 20th century when it came to how we plan for our cities is, if you make it easier for people to drive around with highways, bridges, tunnels, etc., you're going to make people more likely to drive around. So when you build a road and you build a highway, what you're just doing is you're underwriting the auto industry and you're adding automobiles to the road. And then you're on this treadmill of, well, I need more roads because I have more cars, and I have more cars, so I need more roads. Okay, so we want to get off the treadmill and say the reverse is true. That if you reduce the amount of space on the streetscape for cars, that people will be less likely to take their car in. And then you'll push them to mass transit. You'll push them to e-bikes or bikes or other walking. Whatever else other options are that are out there, and you'll fundamentally change the city. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to plan for the people who live, work, and play in the city, not for the people who pass through the city. Too much of the 20th century was spent on building roads that take people through the city, right? Like, I'm in New Jersey, I want to get to Long Island, and I'm going to have this super highway connectivity that takes me through the city. Or the Cross Bronx Expressway is a great example of that. It wasn't for the people who lived in East Tremont or in the Bronx. It was for the people who were passing through. So we eliminate that altogether. And we design the city for those who live here, not for the pass-throughs. And that's also a big fundamental shift.
We only have probably less than a minute left, but I've been curious. Some people grow up and they want to be doctors or lawyers or athletes or architects. You got into the real estate business and urban planning. How did that happen?
Well, you know what? I had the opportunity. I was working in government, and I had the opportunity to work with my aunt. Her name's Tony Haber, one of the best agents in New York City, and she brought me into her team, and I started there, and that's how I started my real estate career. And it's been really rewarding, and it's had all sorts of interesting turns and paths along the way. And when I grow up, I'll figure out actually what I want to do with myself one day.
Well, when you do, we'll have you back to talk about.
You got a deal.
Jason, thank you so much. Jason Haber. So we've run out of time, but to our viewers, thank you very much for watching. I'm Bob Herbert, and I'll see you next time. Take care.